Ja jūs runājat latviski, si vous parlez français, this program is also for you. Subtitles parameters are available at the right bottom of the window. Same thing on your smartphone. This is the small little wheel that will enable you to change the language setting for the subtitles. Keep in mind that me and my spouse create this content on our own. This is a huge workload. To support us, use the PayPal link in the banner or go on paypal.me/VienaBalsi to help us continue this work. And now, enjoy watching. Laipni lūgts programma Viena Balsi. Today we are very glad to receive Gundega Šmite. Gundega is a Latvian composer located in Thessaloniki, Greece. She is also a teacher in the Latvian Academy of Music. Thanks to be here with us. Usually I start asking composers and performers and people who are invited to speak about their biographies, but I feel like I would like with you to get maybe sooner right into how I view you and hear and listen to your music, and if it's okay with you. While I was listening to your work, I had this intuition that it's sometimes like some kind of impressionist paintings, and then suddenly I realize that you made a Van Gogh cycle and you are interested in what is Marc Chagall, and so I would like to have your thoughts about this this intuition I had that seems to be accurate. Sometimes also I have a feeling that in your pieces they are like some kind of conceptual character embodied by each one by an instrument. So yeah.
Thank you, Gilles, first of all, for your invitation to participate in your program. And secondly, thank you for your observation, which is really something very substantial about my music. And yes, indeed, it's interesting that you mentioned this connection between music and painting or colors, which really, to some extent, naturally comes to me when I am about to compose. I am not having exactly synesthesia, which is this color hearing, which many composers are having, so that I would hear a note do sharp and I would see always, let's say, bright green color. It's not always exactly like this, but to some extent I think it is something that I have in my brain structure, that when I hear music, I always see some shapes, colors, they just appear, and it's out of control. Even if I want to ignore it and just to listen to music, sometimes I even find it problematic when I go with friends to drink coffee in a nice place and there is a background music. I cannot sometimes concentrate on conversation because always these shapes, colors, just they are rolling in a background and I cannot control it. They are just there in my mind. And yes, I am for sure the composer who is translating my impulses in sounds, but usually these impulses are related to some colors, shapes that start in my mind. Now I speak about kind of retrograde process.
Mm-hmm.
And true, you mentioned also the cycles that have been composed after paintings of specific artists. I also have a concerto, actually not performed yet, for flute, bassoon and orchestra after paintings of Paul Klee. I have a piece for string orchestra and electronics, Yellow, Red, Blue, after painting of Vasily Kandinsky, and some more pieces. Where I have found a deep inspiration from these specific artworks, and I have felt that I even established kind of collaboration with this artist who is not anymore alive. I cannot contact him and ask what he thinks about my music, but and maybe he would not be happy about the way how I have translated these paintings. But yes, I have even found some kind of company in these paintings, in even kind of studying the painter's life, aesthetics, getting closer to specific style, and yes, finding this translation of sound, of colors and shapes, and these rhythms of painting in my music.
It's this each instrument that embodies some kind of story of its own, some conceptual character. I think it reaches its optimum of greatness in this small opera that was dedicated to Dainas.
It's chamber mystery Eskara Jāzeps.
Yeah. Yes, where you were in dialogue with Vera Freiberger, who is specialized in the Dainas, or the interview is on LR3. Are you planning someday on writing an opera, a complete opera, maybe longer or something?
That's also a very good question, because I am kind of constantly, not maybe every day, but this kind of wheel is turning in my head already for almost 20 years.
Okay.
Opera. And I have to say that yes, I feel that it would be maybe the greatest artistic challenge that I could fulfill one day, and I have already been planning opera, but for practical reasons it did not become true in a more recent past. But yes, actually it's interesting that I am trying to find this answer, what could be my opera if I would write it, by even inquiring in it. I'm teaching a course, opera and music theater, in the 20th, 21st century in Latvian Music Academy. So I am exploring and studying many operas which have been already composed, and thinking what could be something that I really resonate in a personal level, what could be elements that I could kind of borrow and develop in my own way. And generally, I even have an answer. I think my opera would be a choir opera.
Okay.
I hope that opera singers, soloists would forgive for my answer, but I somehow always find problematic this operatic voice expression, that it feels for me a bit kind of artificial. Okay. And even this kind of dialogue about everyday situations, let's say, would you like that I make you a coffee, but in this vibrato way, and then there is an answer later, my darling.
This is what I always hated with opera. This is the only aspect I don't like with opera. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I hope that my colleagues opera soloists will forgive me this statement, but really I don't feel that it would be opera soloists that I would use in my opera. And what I have really found inspiring is productions where Latvian Radio Choir has participated. If you know their collaborations with this Hotel Pro Forma, a Danish production company, they have made 2 operas. One is Orpheus.
Maybe it will be an occasion to discover anyway.
And another is Neo Arctic, where also Krists Ausnieks has participated as a composer. And these are, for my aesthetic standards, like perfect operas, where there are no arias, nothing artificial. It is just more metaphoric movement of scenes, not a plot with love triangle or these kind of more, in my opinion, banal plots, but something more metaphorical. And yes, I think I'm thinking in that direction, that I hope that I could one day collaborate with maybe Latvian Radio Choir or another choir to create opera, where probably I would not even need big orchestra. Maybe it would be just a chamber ensemble, maybe something, one instrument, maybe with electronics, maybe it does not need orchestra. But yes, it would be a choir.
Okay, I understand the kind of mannerism that sometimes is some sort of tradition in opera, but it's part of, well, I don't know, but it's kind of really difficult to write an opera and to teach at the same times in particular field of expertise. I find it challenging because maybe you would compare yourself, or you know too much about it sometimes.
Yes, I think that generally it's always about knowing something very well and then forgetting about it at the moment when inspiration strikes you.
Yes.
But generally I think it is the kind of fate of composer generally. You cannot compose if you have not analyzed enough of great music examples. It is kind of a coin with 2 parts of it. You need this analytical thinking, you need to study scores, but of course you also need kind of distancing time from what you know. Otherwise you can study a lot of great music and then you can think, oh, I will never be able to create something that is even worth 5th finger of this great composer. Yes, so I think the formula is to analyze, to get deep, then to distance yourself from it, and then anyway in this subconscious level this knowledge will stay, but at one moment you have to let this inspiration to to give you wings and just to fly with knowledge in background, but in your inspiration in forefront.
Yeah, knowing enough but not too much.
Exactly.
Yes. One of the other thing about your music I found is it has a form of special mysticism, but I would say a non-naive mysticism, maybe linked also to the fact, I don't know, that you're a woman. Maybe this is a tough question, but especially in your choir works, I feel like there is some part of quest for something absolute. But
yes, I think it is also very true what you say, that there, and the other people also have said that there is this certain part of mysticism in my music. One of my best friends even said there is a black magic in your music, but not in a bad way that I would put a bad energy in my music, but there is something kind of this mystery, magical element. And yes, it is not something conscious that I am trying to create or kind of in a manneristic way. Of course, not at all, but I think it is a part of composition process that I try to enter my territories of subconsciousness, something that I cannot even formulate in words. And yes, to some extent it sounds banal. There is this saying where words stop, music starts, but I think that music has this power to reach something very archetypical, something that we cannot formulate in words, but something that also the listener, if the composer has tried to reach it, not tried even, has searched for it while composing. And if you have felt it, then to some extent probably I have succeeded in my search for this subconscious, archetypical fundaments of our existence or secrets of this world. Sounds a bit kind of esoteric, but I don't mean it in in this trivial.
Yeah, this is not an explicit research.
Yes.
Yeah, indeed.
Yes.
one thing also very striking is I feel like for your concertos or for some pieces you choose some instruments that are kind of unusual or maybe sometimes unknown or underrated. Why is there this particular interest for the accordion? It's
speaking generally about my search for unusual instruments, I remember it even when I was a student in first years of composition department, I was trying always to compose for unusual combinations. I think maybe I would say Opus 1 was a piece for voice, marimba, tam-tam and cello, something that you also don't find so frequently. And basically it was always my wish to search for new sound. I think that the most challenging piece would be for me to compose, let's say, string quartet, because or even solo piano, because so many great pieces have been composed for string quartet or piano solo. To find something that would sound fresh, it's incredibly difficult. I even give up. But these unusual combinations give kind of space to still search for this new sound, which is one of the also most intriguing elements what I'm trying to find in a composition process. But regarding accordion, maybe it will sound funny, but there have been years when I tried to avoid accordion. If you know the ensemble Altera Veritas,
no,
for two quartets, accordion and flute. It is the ensemble for which I composed this Van Gogh cycle. And the ensemble's idea was to combine instruments that are even associated with folk music, like kokle, accordion, which is also, at least in these years, late 90s, early 21st century, especially in the context of Latvia, accordion was really thought, okay, it is like an instrument for ballrooms and for parties, like countryside parties, but not for contemporary music. And okay, flute is flexible enough, fits in orchestra, but also Irish flutes can be used in other contexts. And so, yes, and these musicians with whom I also studied in music high school formed this ensemble Altera Veritas, which was a fantastic ensemble in this sense of searching for a new sound. And they really wanted to play contemporary music, pieces that are created exactly, specially for them. And it was for me a paradise. But still, for the first piece, I said to the kokle player, please, I can compose for kokle, it's a wonderful instrument, but no accordion. I cannot imagine accordion. So my first piece was for flute and two kokles and no accordion. And then there was another piece which I also composed avoiding accordion. And then they asked me to compose a third piece after some years, and they said, now you need to compose for accordion because it sounds like a Euro Radio Commission. They want all four of us, and I said, okay, I will compose also for accordion. And then I met the accordionist, Aldis Jurisons. Actually, he passed away in a very tragic car accident at the age of 25. And he was actually the contemporary accordion pioneer in Latvia. He studied in Moscow with the grand masters there in 90s. And then he was kind of the first one who brought contemporary music techniques with his instrument to Latvia. And then we had one wonderful meeting when I was really understanding that I have been so silly, so full of stereotypes about this instrument. It is a wonderful instrument. It can sound even as synthesizer, as the most modern instrument ever. And it's like even a small portable organ. It can play so many things. And from then I really understood that accordion is fantastic as a solo instrument. It gives a special touch when there is an ensemble. You mentioned this Marc Chagall cycle. I was so happy that I can add also accordion to quite traditional instrument combination, which was string quintet and some woodwinds, because accordion actually even replaces electronics with its high frequencies. It kind of creates a very kind of special orchestrational effect. And then after some years I got an offer to compose a concerto for a solo instrument that I could freely choose and symphony orchestra, and then without much thinking I said I will compose accordion concerto because accordion also to some extent is like a small orchestra, small organ which can find a special dialogue with orchestra in my imagination then, and I am happy for this work that I did it.
Yeah, because it covers a wide range of sound, maybe not like a piano, but almost. I don't know. But it's quite a demanding instrument about tuning. Can you tune an accordion or the other instrument have to get the same tuning like the accordion?
Actually, I have not met this problem.
Yeah.
I guess maybe the instrumentalists, the accordionists have not told me is it difficult or is it not so difficult. But yes, though I remember that they said that they are tuning their instruments 2 times per year. Something like this, so quite similar to piano. But yes, there are many wonderful things about accordion. As you mentioned, yes, it basically covers the whole range of piano with the additional registration. It has this smooth attackas, like piano is partly percussive instrument.
Absolutely.
If you play a key, it just starts. But with accordion, you can have this very smooth beginning, and it can fade out like very, very smooth. I have a cycle for solo accordion. Then, though, I understood that there is a problem if I want a kind of long-lasting, changing chord sequences, progressions. Then there is a problem that they open this bellow and they close, and this is kind of a problem, not problem but challenge, to find the moments when there is this opening of bellows and closing. So accordionists are happy if the composer has thought of it, because the sound is not lasting forever. It is for church organ, it is so you play a key, and as long as you're not hungry or you don't have to go to bathroom, it sounds. But with accordion, there is this opening and closing, which is a restriction. But otherwise, yes, it's wonderful instrument.
Some other ensemble that is quite surprising is this 16 double bass piece. Incredible. Was it made because as a tribute to Peter Vask, because he was playing double bass, or is it in this cycle, or is something that came to your mind?
No, actually, it would be quite crazy to compose a piece for 16 double basses, which is probably, I think there is not a permanent orchestra of 16 double basses existing. So yes, it was a commissioned piece for a very special concert. And it was initiated by the first double bass player of Latvian National Symphony Orchestra, Oskars Bokanovs, who had an idea to invite all Latvian double bass players, for example Gunārs Upatnieks, who is also double bass player in Berlin Symphony Orchestra. And there are some other double bass players who are playing also in Czech Republic, in Germany and other European countries, to call them kind of back to Latvian National Symphony Orchestra and to create this great orchestra to show how talented double bass players we have. And he was also inviting his double bass professor from Prague, who was a teacher of him and some other Latvian double bass players. And yes, so there was this idea of creating this unique orchestra of double basses, 16 double basses, which was about to take place in the first year of COVID times. It was postponed for unknown time, but it took place eventually. So it was me and also my husband who composed these very unique pieces for 16 double basses, which was also a great challenge, but it was incredibly interesting because yes, I did not have any score to study for 16 double basses. I had to
from scratch.
From scratch, yes, exactly. So it was very nice.
It's a surprising piece because you don't expect as a preconception this sound on a double bass, because usually in an orchestra or in jazz music, maybe not in jazz music, but it's used really for, well, low-end sounds. And then you realize, oh, is it really double bass? It's you can do these sounds with a double bass. Well,
Yes, exactly. Double bass has wonderful flageolets, which makes double bass to sound as, I would say, muted violin. Violin that is not bright, but a little bit kind of muted, cloudy. But it really covers a wide range, and this is also the way how I treated the orchestra. It is possible to make kind of full range sounding. It can play very low sounds. It can even play scordatura, which means lower than the than the lowest string, and to go up as high as coloratura or soprano.
What I note in all these comments is how crucial and important the performers are, even on an invitation for a composer. And you're not the first composer who mentioned all these interactions. In one of your choir work, which is Vītols, we can see on the YouTube video all the notations you put. How do you work with performers? You let them know the score first and then make some comments and adjustment? You really want to have a dialogue with them? How do you work with performers?
Generally, in the composition process, my favorite part is the first meeting with a musician with which I start. And then rehearsals before the performance. The performance, usually I get stressed and nervous, and sometimes I get very happy if all goes well, but it is a bit stressful moment when the piece kind of gets born in front of public. But yes, indeed, I start with a meeting of the musician without sketches. And usually I record this meeting. I have created for myself something like an audio bank of different interviews with musicians, where they are demonstrating their instrument. So they talk about their instrument, and they also play different examples, how it sounds, and we start with most common techniques, ending with contemporary techniques, or trying even to invent new technique if I have an idea, or a musician has, sometimes it happens that the musician has practiced and discovered some things, and he says, actually nobody has used this thing, maybe if you want, and then he plays. And so for me it is very important to record this first meeting, because then I kind of cut these parts which I found the most inspiring, and then I listen to them many times. For me, listening to the sound which inspires me is kind of a big bang for me. The ideas really get born when I listen to the sound. Of course, my memory is also not so horrible. It's not perfect and not good enough, but still, this live listening, even recording listening, kind of gives me this feeling that yes, it kind of opens at that moment of listening some horizons where I can go with this sound. So this is this starting process. Like, yes, this would be the second step, that I understand which sounds or which techniques speak to me the most. Then I listen to them a lot, and at the same time already the concept gets born. And then I have actually not a note paper, but a little book which does not have note lines. And then I usually start sketching something, though I don't have painter's talent. My dad used to be an architect and painter, which is also maybe even a hidden inspiration for me. But still I draw for myself some structures. I also even write some little story which might be quite abstract, but sometimes even not so abstract, sometimes even quite concrete. And then kind of I get this idea of the piece, even how it could go from A till Z. And then I start sketching some things, and sometimes it is interesting that this initial shape that I have developed, this initial idea, sometimes when I dive in this material, in this sound, can go in totally different directions. So maybe initial idea turns into totally different idea, but still I need this sketching of something very concrete, and then I feel I can start working.
It's almost like some methods that could be used by a concrete music composer, but instead of sound field sound, the source of this raw material is defined by the dialogue with the performers. It's really fascinating. Okay.
Yes, the sound is fascinating. Also, the personality of the performer. For me, it is very important to meet also a person, kind of to have a feeling of him or her. And yes, if it is a specific commission, if this person asks me for a piece, I really want to dedicate the piece for him or her, as for the musician and as for a personality.
And do you work also with sound engineers for these particular reasons, to maybe some of the sounds need some specific sound takes?
Not exactly. I kind of, though my husband is actually composer as me, who can compose for symphony orchestra and chamber music, but he is also a great electronic music composer. I try still to do things on my own, because yes, two composers in the same house sometimes can lead to thunderstorm. So I try to do things myself. Sometimes my husband helps with processing some final recording of the piece when the piece has been finalized, or when I have finished my score, I might show it to him and welcome him to say some comments, but in the process it's a bit fragile.
About sound textures, it would be cheesy in a sense to say that you could have been influenced by Xenakis. Well, because as I mentioned, you live in Greece, but am I wrong to think that's the case, or is it not an influence sometimes? In some textures in strings, it's very extreme sounds on some strings in some of your pieces.
Yes, my husband would love your observation. He said, you became better composer when you moved to Greece. But yes, of course, I think that also in this subconscious level, we are very much influenced from environment where we live. It was actually, I remember American composer George Crumb, who was a great idol for me when I started composing. And I read in one of his interviews that he said something that I also totally agree, that the place where we grow up really influences our musical perception and our just perception of musical time space so much that we are not aware of it, but it is there. Yes, for sure, Greece is very different from Latvia. Sometimes Latvian composers are labeled to for having too romantic, too slow pieces, not to have these very bright contrasts, which I am not always 100% agreeing to it, but more or less maybe there is this spirit of, let's say, this smooth development, something that is more meditative rather than having these harsh contrasts. And
yeah, it depends on the generation. What I discover with these interviews, it's now very various things. Yeah.
Exactly. But Greece, yes, it is. It's hot. There is so much stone. There is such a translucence of sea waters, and the soundscape. If you go to countryside in Latvia or countryside of Greece, it's very different. These loud cicadas, which, as you mentioned correctly, are present in Xenakis music, which is also actually interesting because Xenakis was so abstract and mathematic in his musical thinking. He was not trying consciously to illustrate something. But for example, in his choral piece Nuit, which is dedicated to the victims of the war, you can really hear these bulletins that he heard in the wartime, which he also explains later, that if you hear one bullet, it is something very specific, concrete, but if there are thousands of bullets being shot next to you, you just hear this sound mass. And the same about cicadas. You don't hear one of them, but this sound cloud. In Latvia countryside, you can also hear these sound masses, but it's different. It's much more smooth. These grasshoppers, some flies, and
damped by the forest.
Yes, it is much more smooth, and it's not this screaming sound, this hot climate which is in Greece, which I think has added to my music more bright colors. Subconsciously, but yes, I think I have probably added to my Latvian smoothness these bright sounds.
Yeah, I didn't mention it, but I feel like there is a lot of contrast in your music. And apart from Xenakis, which composers do you consider that influenced you?
Yes, as I mentioned before, George Crumb. And actually, this idea, what you mentioned before about this searching for mystery or this mystical element in my music, I think generally it comes from him, because he also searches for these depths of human history, human soul, in very symbolic, archetypical level. So I think that it might be related to him. Then Ligeti, of course. He's the building of textures. Also, this I find his music also very abstract, but at the same time visual. I kind of really visualize his music as a very abstract but beautiful painting when I listen to it, but his textural thinking is very close to how I find the sound, and also generally the search for a new sound is something that strikes me in Ligeti. Yes, Xenakis as well. And from older composers, Stravinsky and Bartok, I think. Last years I have found myself also very much inspired by folk music, and I think the way how Bartok and Stravinsky treats folk material is also something that I have been influenced by very much.
So I understand about Bartok and the almost ethnographic works he made. So I suppose you enjoy Brahms as well, maybe?
Brahms, I have to say that probably it is my future research still on Brahms. I have listened to his pieces, of course, especially I like his piano intermezzos. But yes, I feel that maybe when I will become a little bit older, I will start loving him more and more. He has not yet been, let's say, my composer, but yes.
Older, but you're not that old. You were born in 77, which is one of the best years, because this is where I was born as well.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh.
So how did you become a composer? Step after step, who were the people who matter on your road to this during this process?
Well, I was born in I would say culture-loving family. My parents, though they were not professional musicians, they were passionate choir singers. My dad, as I mentioned before, was also an architect and a painter. My sister is a professional pianist and a piano teacher, and my granddad used to be a composer and a teacher as well. And his brother, which was also a very influential figure for me, was one of the greatest exile Latvian poets, incredibly poetic and inspirational personality, who lived in America. But I was even as a child corresponding with him, and he was kind of a big figure for me. Yes, so I would think of my family as not just Latvian, but also this exile Latvian who lives in America. I have also wonderful my mother's cousins who are musicians and very cultural people as well, who have inspired me a lot. And yes, I remember as a child I was admiring my sister playing piano, and I just thought I want the same. So I asked my parents, who decided that their youngest child should do something more practical, and they did not think that I should become a musician. And I was attending Riga First Gymnasium, which was a school of mathematics, which was not easy for me at all. Generally, I was hating that school. So, and I was asking my parents, actually, please bring me to music school as well, because I want to play piano as my older sister. So they brought me there, and I was doing fine, but I would not say that I was, let's say, super bright talent or something like this. I remember actually myself more writing poems, writing some stories. Actually, might be interesting for you to know that in this year my debut literature book will be published.
Oh, also, okay.
So finally maybe literature will start to be more present in my life. So yes, last years I have been starting to write more, which is more like prose, poems, and something that starts looking as a storybook has been formed during last years. So yes, time to welcome literature in my life as well. But yes, I modulated from your question about family. Yes, so it is my cultural background, rich enough, which allowed me to go towards composition, which was really not so direct path, because as I mentioned, my parents were not thinking that I will become a composer or musician at all, but it was my own initiative to follow this path. Then I entered music high school, but still I was not so sure, will I be a musician? And then I started attending theater acting courses, thinking that I might become an actress. And then I entered Latvian Culture Academy theater acting department.
Mm-hmm.
It was incredibly interesting year. Maybe it will help my future opera.
Sure.
Because I learned many things, but then I understood, no, not theater acting. So I went back to music, and then I entered composition department of Music Academy, and then somehow the path just started to flow, and I understood more and more that it is my way.
And would you consider among your teachers to be someone who matters, or some kind of master, if a question is relevant?
There have been few of them.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, a composition teacher, Tamara Kalna, who is actually a mom of Inga Kalna, the famous opera singer.
Mm-hmm.
She was my composition teacher in high school and solfege teacher, incredibly charismatic personality. And she was teaching really how to work with your material. She was actually having a great sense of humor, sometimes a little bit black. Sometimes I came to her and she just took a very big razor and started just to erase everything, and she was laughing at the same time, but in a way that you cannot get mad at her. She was really just saying, "What are you writing? Nobody writes like this nowadays." And then she showed some analysis, and we explored more contemporary harmonic chord progressions, and she said, "No, leave this old stuff. We don't compose like this anymore." And though it sounds a little bit like authoritative, but it was kind of what I needed in that times, to break, okay, in a bit kind of harsh but humorous way, my stereotypes, which are very strong for a teenager. And yes, she developed this kind of ability to self-analyze what you have just written, to work with kind of what we call in Latvian tematiskais grauds, thematic seed, how to develop, how to understand where the material leads itself. So it was very, very good background and kind of basis. Then I would say that a very big figure for me was also my first husband, who is not among us anymore, unfortunately, Imants Mežerops. He was my teacher in high school, and when I graduated, we became couple, and we became parents of our and my only son, who was also a very big breaking point for my life in the best way. But yes, he was much older than me, almost 20 years, though he was always very young in his spirit, and he did not look 20 years older than me, but he was very experienced. Actually, he was a student of George Crumb, and he introduced me to many of his scores, and his musical language was also, let's say, something that was not present in Latvian music life in 90s yet. He had this, let's say, this world spirit, world knowledge, and I was studying a lot of his scores when I was staying with baby at home, and he was kind of a big mentor for me. And also, of course, Pēteris Plakidis, who was my professor in Latvian Music Academy, in totally different way. I would say that he as a personality was incredibly charismatic, he was so creative, he was so special. He was not really like a teacher of composition. When I came to him with my sketches, he said to me, "Gundega, everything is wonderful." And with the other hand, he was already closing the sketch. "Go home, continue, everything is wonderful." And then I went to library of Latvian Music Academy. We already had, it was the beginning of 21st century, it was something new that we had first legatee scores arriving to library, and I was just patiently listening, analyzing, and even sometimes bringing some analysis to Pēteris. And he was kind of curious, okay, but maybe not so much in contemporary music. But what was very interesting, that many composition lessons we spent by analyzing music from 19th century, Sibelius, also Brahms, Mahler, symphonies. He was a fantastic orchestrator, a specialist of orchestra history, and he brought my attention to things that I would not think they are important in, let's say, making this sound, or some very specific orchestrational details. We were reading from scores some parts, and I remember these moments as the best moments in my music academy times.
It was exactly to be my next question. It's that I try to imagine the fresh air it was when USSR ends, and there is all this music that has been some kind of forbidden during 50 years of occupation, and the changes of point of view and culture goes very fast from one generation to another. For people who are 45 and 35 or 20 now, it's super different very quickly. I think it was about the same for Andris Xenakis to have a possibility to get all this music coming and getting these new inspirations.
Yes, indeed, it was so special time. And we were, to some extent, I would say, lucky to be these icebreakers in the context of Latvian music, to bring new aesthetics, to bring these world influences. We were also the first generation who were able to go abroad to attend summer master classes. It was something so special for us, and there was really this feeling that we are kind of coming with something new, something fresh. There was this excitement, and not in a way that we would have, let's say, high nose and we would say, yes, you old ones, you did not understand anything and now we show you. Not at all like this, but because anyway, as I am also teaching Baltic contemporary music in Latvian Music Academy, I also have been researching about this, let's say, modernism tendencies arriving in Baltic states, which are not exactly only 90s. Generally, I think that the breaking point was the festival Warsaw Autumn in Poland. The Poland was, let's say, to some extent semi-liberal in sense of, let's say, the Soviet regime country, where within this festival the West and East met And this was the place where also many Latvian composers got these first Western influences, like Pēteris Vasks, as he also has mentioned actually that he has been influenced by George Crumb. I don't know, did he really listen to George Crumb in Warsaw Autumn, but I assume so. I can even find some very direct influences in some of his works. But it was generally this meeting point of some Western influences that came to Baltic states already in 70s. Imants Zemzaris, who also has some minimalism in his music, also probably through influences from pieces heard in this Warsaw Autumn. Yes, so it is not so black and white that Soviet times just Soviet music and then 90s totally different world. So there were some small breezes of West already in Soviet times.
And this particular moment was in which year? During the 80s?
During the 70s. During the 70s, yes, we can observe already in early pieces of Pēteris Vasks these more Western influences, I would say, along of course with Polish great composers as Witold Lutosławski, also Penderecki, who have been generally, in my view, great influence for also Latvian music.
So this is something that is a field of research in your work as a teacher, if I understand? Okay, yes. So it was a good question.
Okay.
It's all a good reason to be a good question. My last question, that is for all the guests, is as far as you can remember in your childhood, what is the first memory related to sound or music?
Yes, I remember in my childhood's house, which was in the very center of Riga. The neighbor house was the building of edition company. And edition company which also made the printing. So basically I remember in my childhood the sound of printing machine, but not as it is not similar to the contemporary printer. It was kind of continuous, kind of a bit dull but perpetual movement of machine, which I associate with a bit grayish, bluish color.
Okay. That's beautiful. It's okay. Thank you very much for being with us. It was a very mindful interview, in my opinion. If you find this program interesting, please drop a like, subscribe, share on social network. It's the best way to help the growth of this channel. And we will see you there very soon.
Goodbye, thank you.